Greetings from the Long Island Sound podcast. Welcome to the show. Please rate, review, and comment on the show, and call our listener line and leave a message for our guests. Dial 631-800-3579. All right, enjoy the show.
Thanks for joining us for the Long Island Sound podcast. Each week we explore new music and dive deeper with the artists and their stories behind the music. Please subscribe and rate and review us wherever you stream this podcast. Here's your host, Steve Yusko.
Chris Marshak is my guest today, and you are in for a real treat. Man, I learned so much about the music industry. He's a producer, drummer, percussionist. He's worked with so many people, and I think you'll be surprised about the song we're going to hear. Have a listen to the remix of Spanish Dancer by Steve Windwood, featuring Chris Marshak. Enjoy. Drummer Chris Marshak has carved out a niche for himself by crafting a sound, feel, and vibe that is sought after by some of the most respected singer-songwriters and artists in the business. Chris creates pulse with sounds. His unique style and approach to making music is based on the fundamental idea that sounds and parts matter. I'm so happy to welcome Chris Marshak to the Long Island Sound podcast. Great to have you, Chris. Thanks for joining us here. Really appreciate it.
Steve, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. By the way, there is a guy, the quiet guy in the corner is my good friend Steve Martino, who is trained in percussion and is going to help me in the ways of understanding your language, and hopefully we'll ask some great questions. But I have to ask you this, and I'll do the setup as far as, you're a drummer, percussionist, you're also a producer, and you help arrange songs together. What's your approach in helping piece a song together as a drummer, I guess?
I guess each of those roles is a little different, I think. Mm-hmm. As a drummer or a percussionist, when I'm playing with somebody, I have a task that I am working on, and that's to my goal is always to find the heartbeat of each of the songs that I'm either performing on or recording on. And I do that through sounds, my approach to, where I start in the song. Do I come in at the beginning of the song? Do I wait a little bit, and give the song a chance to develop? Whereas a role of a producer is more of like imagine a helicopter hovering above everything, where you have this aerial view where you when I'm a drummer or percussionist, I can be focused on myself and how it fits into the song. But in the role of producer, you need to be considering that same thing is what I'm playing best for the song. But then you also have to consider the other musicians that are playing on there and figuring out a space for them to fit into the puzzle, and what instruments to have in there. The musicians you're going to call, who would be right for the certain kind of song. There are a lot of variables as a producer you have to think about, and then of course there's the artist. You have to be the liaison between the musicians and the artist, and hear what their vision for the song is, and try to support that, but also at times give your 2 cents where you think, at least offer it up as a point of consideration. And, and I find sometimes with artists, when I give suggestions, even if it's the wrong suggestion, and they say, what, I tried that, but I kind of like it the way we had it originally. You actually help them crystallize their vision for the song. Sometimes taking the song just for a brief moment to a place where they don't want it to be makes them realize, let's go back to what the other approach was, or let's go where we first started. And I think, if I offer an idea and it may not be accepted, I don't view that, I think you have to kind of be egoless in the process, because you're helping facilitate this person's song and their creativity. And sometimes suggesting that they go to a certain space and they may be resistant and saying, I don't really want to go there. I like the other one better. You're actually helping them focus what's best, because music is a lot of creative folks, myself included. Sometimes we can get caught on tangents and all the possibilities of things. But when you're in the studio and recording, you're committing to a moment,
Right.
And this is where the song is at this point. This is the way we're hearing it, and let's commit to that,
You bring up a good point. The approaching thing as far as comparison, where they might have something in their mind of a picture of where the direction of the song may be, and you give them just a different twist to it. Now you have this comparison that you can kind of continue the conversation between artist and producer. But let me ask you this, as far as comparison goes, what has changed? You've been playing for a number of years. What has changed with you as a drummer from 20 years ago to now?
That's a good question. As I think back where I was 20 years ago and the way I approach things, I think there are some similarities. I think, I can, as I listen back to old recordings, my voice as a drummer and a percussionist was there. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't as developed. It was on its way. I think now I'm more willing to listen, and I think I'm more able to go where the artist wants to go. Okay. And I'm more detached from my own ideas. I offer an idea, but my sense of identity isn't there. And I think oftentimes, young musicians, they have a certain space that they're strong in, and they kind of want to bring the music into their wheelhouse so that they're comfortable. And sometimes an artist wants to do something. And I guess as I've just been playing for many years and, studied for many years, changing tempo and different sounds and all that, I'm pretty comfortable at varying my approach to things. And I've developed a little bit of a courageousness where I'm not afraid to go anywhere with an artist to see where they want to go, even if it's, wow, this is kind of interesting. Well, this is a little outside my wheelhouse. I kind of trust the process. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think maybe when I was younger, I would try to bring it to a more comfortable place where I was at. In other words, something that, or a certain kind of feel or an approach that I was more comfortable with. I tended to, would often even unconsciously steer the song in that direction. Whereas now I'm aware of that fact, and I guess just my skills have developed. I've been doing this a long time where you just trust that I'm ready to go wherever the song needs to go.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I almost equate, I use analogies a lot just so I can comprehend things because I'm a bit of a knucklehead. I almost equate with what you do. I'm sure you played in a lot of different genres. I looked at, some of the videos and the songs you've been on, and it's kind of a broad spectrum. It's almost like being a softball player, a golfer, and a major league player at the same time. You're all hitting balls, but differently with different styles and different techniques and muscle memory. And that's what I found interesting about your career as both a producer and a percussionist.
I think that, as a drummer and a percussionist, the goal is to play what's right for the song, to find the heartbeat mm-hmm. of that particular song. And sometimes, if you do that well, people see you stylistically through the eyes of the song. And they may say, oh, he's a country drummer, or he's a jazz drummer, or he's a singer-songwriter drummer, because they see that song. And if you do that well, or you do it convincingly, both sonically and the what you play, people see you. And we live in a world where, music has genres and we want to label things.
Right.
And I think as, I've been playing over the years on it, I have a pretty substantial body of work that's out there, of different styles. And I've kind of let go of that. And just like, if people are going to judge me for what they are, my goal is to play what's right for the song that's in front of me and that I'm playing right now. And, interesting story. I remember I saw a drum clinic with a drummer, J.R. Robinson.
Okay.
Who played on all the Michael Jackson stuff. Who played with Rufus and Chaka Khan and, Steve Windwood back in the High Life. I mean, he's like an iconic studio drummer who every drummer knows who he is. Mm-hmm. But he talked about the experience of getting hired to play with Rufus and Chaka Khan. And he said he was playing with this band, and he knew Rufus and Chaka Khan and the band and everyone came in. They were in the place watching him, kind of to
assess him,
evaluate him. Yeah, there was a possibility that maybe they were interested in him. And mm-hmm. he said that he, prior to that, anytime there was someone he wanted to impress, he made a conscious effort to, play fills and to really try to play his best. And he described this moment where he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play for the song, regardless of who's in this room. And I remember he shared that at the clinic. And ironically, that was the gig that he said that they heard him and that ultimately led him to being hired. But it always stuck with me because, the ego we have, in music, if we take even outside of music, people have egos, the way we're perceived. We want to come across a certain way. And navigating, knowing when your time is to shine, but also having humility at other times and navigating that and playing for the music is extremely, I think, important. And it's rarer these days because of things like, Instagram, and there's a lot of social media stuff where they're 15-second increments or 60-second increments. And, in that time frame, people, I call it drumnastics, where people play
and do
it's
a
just
flurry.
like it's about it's like drumming has become an extreme sport. And sometimes I watch some of these guys that I'm in awe of from a technical standpoint, because I, having played many years, I know what's involved to be able to achieve that. And at the same time, as much as I can be appreciated by that, And we live in a sensationalized society where people are more impressed by bigger, faster things. And finding my niche, in the world, where your weapon is subtlety,
Right.
and finding a place in this climate of where bigness and the bigger it is, the faster it is. It's more shared on social media, and it gets more attention.
To
But
what
yet,
purpose? Right.
well, the purpose is, there's a purpose there, and I guess ultimately, um, I don't judge any of those drummers or that approach.
Hmm.
I guess at the end of the day, and it's my life. Where do I fit in this world? And I've never, since I was young, I've never felt. I've listened to drum solos. I remember my grandfather bought me a Buddy Rich. It was
Oh,
like a Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson drum battle album, and listening to it, and it was just really cool. But once I started to listen to music, there was something about music that was just that the drum solo. Even as a drummer, I was never really enamored by it. I've certainly studied, uh, taken many drum solos myself, and have to. That's part of my job. Is you're on a gig, people want you to solo and
hmm.
create some energy. So I do it and I work on it. But if I had to be honest, I tend to, yeah, it's just when I see it, I kind of turn the page. Like if I see it, I'll watch for a minute and appreciate it. But I'm generally more, I gravitate more towards songs and people who have something to say with their instrument, and it's subjective. It's just me, and I think as we listen to things, and developing our sound as a player where we're making the music, I think in the listening process, we can gain a tremendous amount of insight into who we are, but what we like to listen to. Just, just to really be curious about that. Like, wow, why do I like this?
Right.
Now, all of this, it's not you either play what you like or you do this. It's a lot of music is an and, because to be a working musician, you need to be able to be diversified and play different styles, play them convincingly. I guess, some of the things I'm speaking to now are where I'm at in my life, and it's about developing a sound. What's my musical fingerprint? Where do I fit into this world musically? And who am I? Because, if you're trying to be anybody, no matter how good you copy them, at the very best, at the absolute best you're going to be is a second rate, whatever that is,
Gotcha.
at the absolute best. So I want to be, it sounds cliche or maybe it sounds weird, but I'm the best Chris Marshak in the world.
That's good way to approach it. Hey,
And
go
yeah.
ahead.
So it's kind of like, and I think each drummer and each musician, and I'm moved when I sense somebody has something special and they've developed something that's authentic and unique to them. I tip my hat to them, and it's very powerful. I think authenticity in people and in music, to me, is something that moves me and gets me excited.
I got to ask you this. And are you familiar with the movie Whiplash?
I have seen it once when it
Okay.
first came out.
So there's this one scene in Whiplash, and I forget the actor's name. He does the Farmers Insurance commercial. He's phenomenal.
Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about, but I cannot remember his name.
And in this scene, he's ripping this student a new asshole for other purposes. And it's disturbing to watch, you're not going to do this to my drum kit, to my jazz ensemble. I mean, the guy was absolutely brutal, but it was just interesting how that scene came about. So I don't know if you've had any experiences with people like that in directing in directing
I've had,
you.
yeah, I have. Early on, I had an experience when I was younger,
Okay.
and I think I'll tell you about it in a minute. It's actually, I think you'll find it an interesting story. But I think that there is in the jazz community,
Okay.
we have this art form that is older, and it's being curated and kept alive, and there's a real appreciation for for the history of the music. And it's a beautiful art form, and knowing the history is very important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that not with all, of course, this is just my take on some of the musicians I've interacted with, but it seems to be some type of rite of passage to be, really hard on somebody, like, you got to get your shit together. And there's some nobility in it, having it be done to you, and you also maybe doing it to a younger musician. And I never really...
It's almost like, it sounds like almost like hazing when you come into a group in order to pass the smell test, I guess. Can you take it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I had an experience. I remember, I started playing drums when I was like 12 years old. And when I was in ninth grade, I however old, a few years later, I had never really played jazz. I was playing rock and roll at the time. And I remember my mother seeing something, IAJ, which was the International Art of Jazz. There was something on Monday nights at Stony Brook University.
Okay.
She said, it looks like this thing, and you go there and it's about jazz. Maybe you'd like, and she signed me up. So I remember going, and it was, it would start off where you'd go into your groups of drummers, bass players, piano players, horn players. You'd work with your instructor, and then you'd come together and you'd listen to the instructors perform together. And it was my introduction to jazz. And the drummer there was a fantastic drummer and teacher named Michael Carvin. And still alive today, still playing great. And he was my first introduction to learning about jazz. It was really, and even when I was there were kids my age, but they had been playing jazz longer, and you could tell it was more in their blood at that point. It was a new language to me at that point. But anyway, part of the evening was you would go and work with some of the other instructors. So I wouldn't just work with Michael. I'd work with the guitar instructor, and I won't mention his name. But I remember at the time, here I am going there on a Monday nights trying to learn about jazz, and I had a Led Zeppelin t-shirt on.
Okay.
And he, in front of everybody, he blasted me, like, what are you listening to? You should be listening to more jazz. Enough with that Led Zeppelin stuff. Like, wow. Really kind of chastised me in a way that was, and I remember the guitar. He's still around. He's a guitarist. I remember him. I'm not going to mention his name.
Sure.
Because I'll cut him a little slack, but for whatever, maybe he had a bad day, but anyway,
you're a good man.
It was an embarrassing moment at the time, but Michael Carvin heard what had happened. Mm-hmm. He heard what happened. And one thing I got from that, going to this IAJ jazz thing with him, is that there was a camaraderie among drummers. Okay. And he was kind of, Mike, even back then, he was like a loving, but he had a firm side to him, but he did it in a loving way. Mm. But he caught wind that this guy embarrassed me and kind of publicly called me out in front of the group, and he didn't like it. So when they were playing later that night, and that guy was soloing and Michael was playing under him,
right?
He was fucking with him.
Oh, really? You could spot it.
It was like, don't mess
with my guy. Yeah.
Don't mess with my guys. What you did was wrong. And he was playing he was playing musical, but he made it. I remember the guitar player had a frustrated look, like he was looking at Michael. He didn't know what was going on. But there was an older gentleman there who was also, while it was my intro to jazz, there was another gentleman there who was older. I forget, he had children at that time, and he would drive me there. But I kind of sensed this, but on the way home, he said, you know what went on, right? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, he was sticking up for you.
Right.
He was letting him know. So I had experienced that then. I was, again, wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, and maybe the way I was playing wasn't as real, and he thought I needed to do that. So he used it as to publicly chastise, bringing it back to the movie. And yeah, I don't know how productive that is. I know it makes a good movie and a good scene.
But you know what's interesting about your story? Your story could have ended with, you know what? I had a bad experience. They were all a bunch of jack-offs, and I didn't go back. But the fact you had an opportunity to see somebody stick up for you, I don't know. To me, that kind of creates community and say, there's a mentorship here, even in the smallest way, that I'm sure affects your life, in the future.
He made a memory. I think that memory of this, jazz guitar player kind of whiplashing me, for a lack of a better word, in front of everybody. Had that been the last taste in my mouth, maybe it would have been different. But because Michael kind of gave it to him, and he clearly let him know musically, don't mess with my guy.
Right.
And I'm grateful also I had this older drummer there who could frame it for me and kind of let me know what was going on. Because, I was ninth grade. And
yeah, what do you know, right?
I didn't know, but he was like, that's what happened. And so it was always a story, even as I haven't brought it out in a while, the story. But as you brought up the whiplash, I don't know. That's just not my personality too. I guess some folks may gravitate towards that. And, of course, there's the story of Buddy Rich, and there's these infamous Buddy Rich tapes where like he would berate his band and they taped them and they go floating around the internet.
Oh, really?
Like,
wow.
And it was like really ruthless kind of stuff. And, in the drumming community, it's, you could listen to them. But yeah, that's just not me. But I do think that and maybe it goes on in other genres, but I've experienced it with some folks in the jazz world, and I don't know if it's a rite of passage. To me, it's like a point. I'm like, I think you can achieve the same result,
right? With kindness,
well, kindness, or like I said, Michael Carvin. And my recollection to him was he was firm but loving, and he had I can remember the things he did, that got me. That was my introduction to jazz, and just I think that's what a good teacher does. He activates a curiosity within you that makes you want to look a little closer at this thing that can seem very complex from a distance.
Nice. Well, that's a great story. And with that, why don't we take a break and we'll be right back after this. Thanks so much, Chris. At the Long Island Sound, we're much more than a podcast. We're building a community. Please go to gigdestiny.com, check out all our social media links, subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Please comment, call the listener line, tell us what you think, what questions we should ask, who we should have on the show. And most of all, we thank you for your generous support. And remember, support the artists who are guests on the show. Now back to the podcast. Hey, we're back with Chris Marshak and my sidekick, Steve Martino. Chris, I got to ask you this. How would you describe where you are today and what your wheelhouse is as far as drumming goes?
I reached a point in my life where I said, what do I like? Do I like this? And what is it? Why do I like certain things more than others? And I just, again, that curiosity, we talked about it, just be curious about why do I like, why do I, in the same way as people, we're individuals, and I think as musicians sometimes, we study to be everything. You want to be able to play jazz, you want to be able to play classical. And in the same way, a human being can't be everything. Musically, yes, I'm always trying to grow with what I do, but at this point in my life, I'm like, who am I? What's my musical fingerprint?
Gotcha.
Where do I belong? So it's not this is who I am, leave me alone. It's an and situation. I'm studying, I'm playing jazz, I'm learning, trying to grow my knowledge and find out who I am at the same time. And sometimes finding out who you are is, in terms of a sound, and I think this is true not only of myself or musicians, but songwriters, recognizing who you're not is equally as important as who you are at some point. When you're younger and I think about when I was 17 and I would learn, listen to a Led Zeppelin record and I would copy the style and, try to learn a Bonham fill or a Neil Peart, there was something you tried to learn and it was a certain part of development that you could do that. And it was such a fun time to do that. But at this point in my life, the idea of I'm curious about myself, who am I? Right. It isn't as satisfying to me to just play something and do it exactly like someone did it 40 years ago when they were 21 years old. I guess maybe I just have something to say at this point in my life, and maybe that's why I am gravitating more a little towards jazz now and art forms that are a little more interpretive and yeah.
All right, so let me ask you this. Let's turn back the pages a little bit because I'm very curious about when it struck you that, one, did you just pick up the drums at a certain age and that's what you ran with? And then at what point in your life did you say, hey, I'm really serious and I'm good at this and I really want to keep learning and keep developing myself? Where did it begin with you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it began with the kid across the street, who I would play basketball in the street with. And one day, he was also a drummer. But I went over his house one day, and he wasn't ready to come out. So his grandmother said, "Why don't you wait downstairs for him?" So I went downstairs, and there was a drum set down there. And it was like, what is this? And I walked over to it, and I, touching it like, just like afraid that someone would hear me, but yet trying to navigate that with this like curiosity that was just flowing out of me. And then, I gradually sat behind it and started playing. And, he came down and I was startled. I remember being startled, but that was my first memory where I'm like, there's something here that I'm really, really interested in. And, that was my, my first like memory of where the drums said, hey, hey, come with me, that kind of thing. And, it's funny. I grew up in a house, I grew up reading like Modern Drummer magazine, and you'd read these guys that talk about, I grew up, my father listened to Miles Davis and we played a house full of jazz, and it was just music was always playing. We were singing, and that was just so not my experience.
Wow.
In my home. My grandfather, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I tell you, what, that's interesting because that's, of the interviews that I've done, I joke around, my father played the radio, which is an influence of its own. But it's interesting to hear that wasn't your experience. I got a quick question. Was the guy's name Mike across the street? The kid that had the drum set?
Oh, no, his name was Kevin Kelly, actually, who was a drummer. At that time, he was a couple years older, and he was a drummer. And, I think when you're young, you have a limited experience, especially back then before the internet. Your world was your neighborhood. And
right.
The kid was older, and the band that, even the band that was 4 years older that played at the high school parties. And, they're permanent, those guys. And many of them don't even, don't play professionally now. But the impact that they had at that moment in time on me was tremendous. Just seeing that. Actually, one of the most amazing, inspiring performance I have was when the high school jazz band came down to the middle school and played for us.
Wow!
In my mind, it was the greatest thing in the world. Interesting enough, if you had a recording of it, you probably listen to it now. It probably wasn't that great, I would imagine, or it was okay. But it didn't matter because I was so impressionable at that time. And there was something about hearing someone take a drum solo and hearing the horns of the jazz band and just the drums that I had seen in my friend's basement. Now another experience in front of people and seeing how the crowd was interacting with them. And it was just, I think it's the early memories for me, in my house, even like not having jazz, but my mother, John Denver, Elvis, these were the kinds of things, Johnny Mathis, my mother would listen to. And only until later on, music, I would start listening and then developed a curiosity, which led me to learn about different artists, and people would recommend things and share the same journey everyone did, hey, you should listen to this. And we all had that experience where somebody turned us on to some music. And it was just a magical time. It really was. Yeah,
I tell you, when the audience knows, I actually interviewed Chris's brother, Matt Marshak, who's a world-renowned jazz guitarist and one of the most humble guys, I think, in the music business, to be honest with you. And when I asked Matt, who was your influence, he pointed you out, Chris. He said, yeah, when Chris was playing with his buddies, that's where his curiosity got piqued. And it's amazing how siblings can have that kind of influence on each other,
I think part of it, too, is, I was the drummer. So all the bands I played with, you rehearse at the drummer's house. So he was home and he was hearing it. And my brother, who, as you mentioned, is very, very successful guitar player and singer-songwriter in his own right. Mm-hmm. He didn't start playing till a little bit later than, I think he was 16 or 17 when he started playing, which is, not super late, but he was, he would come down. I remember watching the rehearsals and, meeting the musicians I was playing with. And, you could see he started playing, and I could, now that you say it, I could see the correlation. And I never really thought, I haven't thought about it lately. But yeah, I guess I'm imagining his older brother playing in the house with these musicians coming over, probably planted the seeds for him in the same way some of those early musical experiences I talked about influenced me.
Yeah, well, the reason why I bring it up is so you can hold it over his head. If he gets a little smarmy, a little too big for his boots, you can say, "Hey, I got you started," and Yusko pointed that out on the podcast.
Yeah, Matt's we're brothers, but his humility, he's as humble a person as you can get.
Absolutely,
and,
that's right.
He'll be the last person to tell you about his accomplishments and things he's done, and I'm thankful. It's funny as you get older, you realize like playing with your brother in family situation. I really appreciate it more and more now these days.
That's great.
When we get the opportunity to make music together.
So as you progress through high school, I would assume, and you're drumming, did you do band in school, or did you do the playing with bands, rock and roll bands? Where did it progress for you from that point?
I think initially I took lessons, and in school I played in the band, the concert band, and then got into the rudiments and all the basic things. And then from there, I think, you develop bands with friends your age, kids in the neighborhood, and let's get together and play. And I grew up on Harrison Avenue in Miller Place, and right down the road from me, the person I made the most music with when I was younger was Mike Del Giudice from Billy Joel's band, and aside from that, I'll say Mike is an extremely fine singer-songwriter in his own right, and I do play and record on. I've been the last few years playing on all Mike's original stuff, and he's like I said, most people know him for the Billy Joel because it's such a high-profile thing, but in his own right, he's a fantastic singer-songwriter, and he's a big part of my early musical memories. Coming over, and he was a force of nature. Even at 10 years old, Mike, he could sing. He was playing interesting songs. He exposed me to stuff that I had never heard of. He would come over. We'd rehearse in my bedroom. And a funny story is we didn't have a microphone stand, so we taped the microphone to the ceiling in my room, which was wallpaper at the time. And for years later, now my parents have since changed it, but that spot where the duct tape came off, where it was hung from, was there for years. And when you were young, you were curious, and you had what you had, and you were going to figure a way to make something with that. We would play with no bass player, not even realizing that wow, what it would be like to have a bass player. We just wanted to make music and play, and so Mike was a big part of my earliest musical memories, and certainly helped me get me excited and exposed me to a lot of different stuff that I hadn't heard at that age.
Yeah. I actually listened to Mike's, because I was trying to get Mike on the podcast, and I was listening to his original music, which is great, and certainly, his fame with Big Shot and Billy Joel overshadows things, but in his own right, I think he wrote a song for Kevin James for his TV show, and I listened to a few of his things, and I'm like, wow, this is it's just really great. And now he has a platform, and he seems like he's all over the place. He's probably one of the hardest working guys.
And during the pandemic, he did that On the Porch thing that he did, where he was playing his original music and playing some covers his own way, and he's developed an amazing community of these porch, I don't know, they're just these people live on the porch, and they all follow him around, and it's just a beautiful community of people that support him. And so I think he's onto something with that. And
it's amazing, with the quarantine, so many things happen. I mean, we all kind of fell into a depression. Some people became very creative. I had this guy, Dante Mazzetti, who's a fireman in New York City, who played every night from his 17th floor balcony in Chelsea with his wife, and built a huge audience with it, and really used social media to expose his music, which is interesting, So let me, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, Chris, in the way things have changed with moving from people getting studio time to doing things remotely. I mean, do you meet the artist remotely? Do you meet them first, one-on-one? How does that come about?
I mean, the biggest thing, in doing what I do, a sideman, it's word of mouth. People hear your work. I think that's ultimately, people hear what you're doing and they hear something about it that they feel would be connected to their music. And, some of the recordings and producing I do, you go into the studio and everyone can record at the same time. So you may have a rhythm section, a bass, acoustic guitar, and the singer in there, and you're able to do it together. But in some of the smaller studios, and there sometimes you're doing a track and you may only do two people at a time and then overdub the rest. So there is no, I think that's the thing about the times we're in. There's really no rule, and people are doing it a lot of different ways. And I try to, with the different artists I work with, depending on what their needs are, what their level of comfort is, I try to, make them comfortable. When you are recording, file sharing or doing remote recording, sometimes, one way to make that an effective process is playing with a click track or a metronome. Mm-hmm. And some folks are they've been doing that. They practice it. Some folks are not that comfortable doing that. So in those cases, sometimes you have to alter what you're doing. Back to what I said before, you can have a thumbprint. This is the way you do it, and which makes things easier. And there's certainly advantages to that. But if you're playing with somebody that maybe is self-taught, they're talented and fine, really talented in their own right, but they never did that. And now all of a sudden they're playing and they're thinking. Now you're taking the soul of what they're doing out of it. So, so navigating that, allowing the artist to be comfortable, but also utilizing the process in a way that some people are going to have to play later, and trying to create something that feels good and is natural sounding. And sometimes that happens right away. Sometimes that takes a little work, mm-hmm. And I think with, as far as my own drum tracks, I'm come from a generation where you're like, when I press record, my goal is it's a 4-minute song, is to play a take that is the song.
Right.
I don't think, all right, I'm going to play a verse and then I'll just cut. No, I'm of the ilk of like, I'm trying to make something happen here. Now, that being said, technology is there where you hit a snare, just one little thing's weird. It's a means to an end. I realize some people use technology as becomes the means in itself, and they don't, they play 2 bars and they loop it and they do that. And that's just, I'm not here to diminish anybody or there, but that's just not the flow that I connect with. I connect with trying to, the old school thing was, before technology, you played for 4 minutes and that was the take, and the imperfections in there. And that's why I think some of the older recordings that we all have grown to love, there's something special about them, and they're not all perfect. I think that we live in a grid-based society. We want to quantify everything. We want things to be, in the 80s when I grew up, when I was in high school, there was drum machines, and it set a standard of time that in some ways was helpful to raise everyone's level. But then that became, if everyone's playing in a certain thing and to a grid, it takes the individuality of each person and the musician out of it. And so it's this balance when you're doing the remote recording of trying to keep what's natural, but also keep in mind that you're trying to create art.
Interesting.
And once if it's 1957 and you're Miles Davis and you're recording in a room with one microphone and this is the take, that's it. But once you enter the world of using some of the technology, I think you're at that point, people are going to evaluate the final product as the art. In the same way we go to Star Wars and we see a movie and they're using a green screen to shoot the scenes. We don't watch the movie and say, oh, that's not real. They used a green screen. We judge the art at the end for the art as itself. And I think in music, in some ways, that ultimately the end art is, if you're doing it in a really purest sense where it's one microphone and there's no overdubs, that's a special thing. But once you enter the realm of where you're using overdubs, and then I think, at that point, as long as the spirit of it is to try to create something that's soulful and true to the artist, judge the end art and see if that moves you, you
Right.
know?
Right, exactly. Hey, let me ask you this. So coming into the podcast, our audience heard you're drumming, you're playing on Steve Winwood's A Spanish Dancer. How did that come about?
That came about in an interesting way. The producer of that is this really talented person named Ben Wish. And Ben is a Grammy Award-winning producer who, I mean, he's most notably known. He produced Walking in Memphis by Mark Cohn.
Oh, okay.
And I met Ben in a kind of a roundabout way because I was producing a song for an artist and we were about to mix it. And I didn't know Ben at the time, but the song was reminiscent of a song on Mark Cohn's first record, a song called 29 Ways. And I said, wow, this would be great to have him mix it. And long story short, I reached out to him and somehow got him to mix the song. And when he mixed it, I think at that time I was like, well, he's going to mix it. He's got to listen to me drumming. Wow, it would be great someday to work with him,
Okay.
And so he did that song that I produced and I met him. And then the artist was so happy with the rest of the record. He brought the rest of the record to him to mix. And I played on the whole record. So he had to listen to me. So, and I would hear feedback, along the way, like, yeah, he really likes what you do. He's a fan.
Mm.
And Ben has worked with, Steve Gadd, Sean Pelton. He's like some of the top guys in the world. I'm like, so, so over time, I played with different artists. And when it came to the mixing, I would steer them Ben's way because he's very great. He's an unbelievable mixer. Sensitive to songs, and he's got a unique voice in what he does.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, he was hear me play, and I would get, I would hear rumblings from the different artists that he was a fan of what I was doing. But he never hired me. I mean, that was something. You always, when you work with somebody, you hope, wow, do you make enough of an impression that they may consider to use you? And probably like 3 years went by, and a lot of music I sent to him, and we became friends. But he had never hired me. And I could remember the day that I got an email and it said session, and I opened it up and it was like, I'm producing a song for Steve Winwood. We're going to redo. Steve Winwood was putting out a greatest hits, and they were going to redo a song called Spanish Dancer, which was from his record Arc of a Diver.
Right. Yep.
And that whole record was done with the Lynn drum machine, and it's a really pivotal record. It's just a wonderful record. But we were going to do an acoustic version of this song. And so when I cut the track, Steve wasn't there, but we played it, and I was playing to the original tracks that were on the recording. And what happened was interesting. His original vocals, and when you hear Steve Winwood's voice in your headphones, he's an iconic voice. At least for me. When I hear his voice, there's very few people that have, you hear him in 1 minute, who's singing. And so I did my parts. I went in and originally they were going to just use his old vocal. He was just kind of doing this as like just another new track, an acoustic version to add on the record. But he heard the song and got so stoked about it and excited he wanted to re-sing the song.
Wow.
So he ended up re-singing the song, and the track ended up he put out a single CD, the best of Steve Winwood, Traffic, Spencer Davis Group, and a 4 CD box set at the same time. And the song ended up on both of those.
Oh, wow.
Both of those things. There was on the one CD, it was a shorter radio edit, but on the other song, it was a longer version. And so that song was the first one I did for Ben, and it's led to a really great friendship, and we work together all the time on a bunch of different projects. And I'm a big fan of Ben, but yeah, it was just I think I think about the process of how I met him, and the other part to it is when I got into recording. I remember years ago when I got into buying my own stuff to record. Had I not done that, I wouldn't have been producing a song for somebody,
Wow.
and that led me to have a different role and reach out to him to mix a song that I was producing. And so, I find it interesting in life, not only my life, but everyone's, is where sometimes we look where we are, but if you trace back to where it started. Very often it's in an idea of, like, in my case, it was like just researching him on the internet, seeing if he was accessible, dreaming big, like, hey, I don't know this guy, but I'm a fan of his work. What's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, my father always, his attitude was always to us. You always ask. The worst case scenario, you're in the same exact position you were before you asked.
They could just say no. Yep, exactly.
You just don't know. And had I not done that, and it's led to that. And so I think sometimes as musicians, when we want to help ourselves grow and expand our circles, sometimes the best way to do that is to hire people, and develop relationships. You can't, ultimately, if I played and he heard the work that I did and he didn't connect with it, doesn't matter how much you're a schmoozer are that you hired him, they're not going to hire you. But I feel like in the world I live in, word of mouth is everything. So I feel like, people know my name and they've heard me. That's all I can really do. Everything else is out of my control. To have enough of a presence where people have heard you through the different people you've worked with. And because when someone's going to hire me, I'm not in the room. That's in anything, in any profession, in a job, when you go for an interview or anything, when you're getting hired, you're not there. So that's a variable that's out of my control. You could just do the best job you can. You could be the best person you can. But at the end of the day, those kinds of things, those good opportunities, he heard enough from me where I guess he wanted to have me on it. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. It was a wonderful experience, and it's led to a really great friendship with Ben. Yeah, musically and otherwise, yeah.
Hey, that's all the time we have for part 1 with Chris Marshak. Please check out the second part of the episode. We explore the production process and mixing, and we really take a deep dive into the music industry and his process. There's so much more to learn here. So until next time, be well. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the time you spent with us. Please subscribe and comment and visit us at gigdestiny.com. Till next time, be generous with your joy, keep your spirits high, and let the music take you on a journey. Be well. Peace. Thanks so much for listening. Please rate, review, and comment on the show. We really love to hear from you. And call our listener line at 631-800-3579. Again, thanks so much. Be well.